Hey YouTube, got a couple minutes. I'm down for a few days at least here, waiting for some parts from the machine shop and waiting for my radiator core to show up. So I'm tackling some small projects, namely the replacing the seals on my PTO flange. So it's pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty easy to do. I think the only pitfall on these is the directionality of the seal, right? Because sometimes these are pretty much all similar, but sometimes it's a little bit ambiguous of which side goes on the dry side, which side goes on the wet side. So here's how I keep it straight. If you were to look at all of these seals, they make these in all kinds of flavors, right? You can get double lip, triple lip. Some have garter springs, some don't. Some have fully encased steel reinforcement rings. Some are open shell like this. And in this case, the open shell is kind of the Captain Obvious one. The open shell typically would point towards the wet side, and the garter spring would point towards the wet side. On this example, it's not so clear because it's, number one, it doesn't have a garter spring. Number two, it doesn't have an open shell. So how do you keep it straight? If you put them in and also if you put them in backwards, they will leak, and they leak in really short order. So let's say I'm using this on a crankshaft pulley and I put it in backwards. As soon as I start that engine and I move it 5 feet, that sucker's going to be pouring oil out of the seal, right? So how do you keep it straight? So here's kind of a schematic. If I were to cut one of these in half and look at it in the side view, you've got the center line of your rotating surface, and then the sealing surface itself. So this would be the shaft surface, and as long as it's fairly smooth, no nicks or gouges, and as long as it doesn't have a tremendous amount of run out, these work great. The seals, all, again, I had mentioned they make these in a bunch of different flavors, but they all have two common components. One is they have a sealing surface, and then they have like a dust lip or something to keep crud from the dry side from migrating and back through the seal and then potentially interrupting the seal integrity. So the wiper, or the oil seal itself, is typically, it always has a much shallower angle, and it's always the longer flexible one. And if it has a garter spring for which essentially gives it a radial force, and it allows it to tolerate more run out or more irregularity in the surface, that's always going to point to the wet side. Okay, so this would be like inside of the crankcase or the PTO case or whatever has the oil in it. The shorty, what I call the short side, that's always referred to as the dust lip, and its only purpose is to prevent stuff from migrating back through. If it, so if you get a bunch of dirt and a bunch of garbage piling up on here, you don't want it to get back under here and potentially migrate in and interrupt that seal. So the dust lip is typically a much steeper angle, and it's much stiffer. The actual seal itself is usually the longer blade, and it has a much shallower angle. So that's the easiest way for me to keep it straight. So on this example, where I can't, it's not particularly obvious to me which side goes where. And again, a lot of times you're dealing with a schematic drawing from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which just has a picture of a ring getting installed, and it's like, well, okay, what side? What side? I would inspect this very closely, and I would see, all right, this is the stiff, really steep angle, so that's probably my dust lip. And then if I flip it around, this one doesn't have a garter spring, but if I flip it around, that's my flexible short angle, right? So that's the long side of the seal. That's the side you want to point towards the wet case. All right. So that's how I keep it straight. Hopefully that's helpful for you. Again, if you put them in backwards, you'll know it pretty quick because they are going to leak like a sieve. So I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and go install this guy. Thanks, YouTube. Talk to you later.